No, thank you very much, House Chair. The Economic Freedom Fighters rejects the proposed fiscal framework as introduced by the Minister of Finance during the budget speech last week. We know that after the budget, there were talk shops called public hearings, which under balanced circumstances were supposed to interrogate the budget and present superior alternatives to an otherwise neoliberal and right-wing budget whose aim is to consolidate, deepen, and strengthen the white capitalist establishment on the supposition that such will in the future trickle down to ordinary people. We take note that for the first time since 1994, the biggest expenditure item on the budget is debt services cost, meaning that the state will spend 301 billion rands paying the interest of the more than 4.7 trillion debt that the South African government owes to different domestic and global financial institutions, which regrettably include the IMF and the World Bank. Many other countries in the African continent, including Ethiopia, Angola, Tanzania, Egypt, Kenya, and many others are borrowing money and entering into developmental partnerships with financial institutions from different parts of the world. What is markedly different about these loans and partnerships is that they result in significant and impactful infrastructure development programs and building of new industrial zones, which in turn create jobs and reduce poverty. On the contrary, the South African government borrows billions of rands to pay salaries and to pay the multinational corporations that are frog-marching South Africa into an evidently unjust energy transition. The trillions of rand the South African government borrowed from both domestic and global capitalist banks are not adding any significant value to the development of the productive forces, is not creating additional jobs, is not reducing poverty. These trillions of rands borrowed by the South African government come with conditionalities and certainly are an instrument to undermine South Africa's policy and political and strategic sovereignty. The most perfect illustration that South Africa's policy sovereignty is undermined is witnessed through the so-called structural reforms, which, if you read closely, are not different from the structural adjustment programs that seek to privatize South Africa's state-owned assets. The South African Airways has already been privatized to a consortium that is linked to the dominant white capitalist establishment here in South Africa, and not to a strategic equity partner who would have added the much-needed value into the airline. The mutilation of Eskom into 3 different divisions is a direct privatization of energy generation, which will evidently soon lead to the privatization of both energy transmission and distribution. And despite the ruling party's resolution 5 years ago to create a state-owned bank, which they said is a matter of urgency, and the repeated commitments by the Ministry of Finance in this administration, the state-owned bank is not yet created. And the Minister of Finance said during the budget briefing that he does not have a mandate from his own president to create a state-owned bank. And despite the ruling party's resolution to discontinue the private ownership of the South African Reserve Bank, the central bank remains in private hands and currently is at the forefront of irrationally and unlawfully destroying black-owned insurance companies. The 2022 fiscal framework announced a reduction of corporate income tax by 1%, despite lack of any empirical evidence that such will lead to increased investment and job creation. Since 2020, South Africa has lost more than 2 million jobs, and almost all these jobs were lost in the private sector. Yet this government still insists that jobs must be created by the private sector. There is currently more than 11 million people in South Africa who need jobs and cannot fund them. Yet the budget does not say anything concrete and believable to create jobs for the people of South Africa. The reality is that almost everything else that the National Treasury does is not leading to stimulation of the economy, it's not leading to the development of the productive forces, it's not leading to job creation, it's therefore not leading to poverty reduction. There is continued refusal to accept that you can use fiscal and procurement policies to drive industrial local expansion, but National Treasury is not utilizing that instrument much more meaningfully. We reiterate our demands as the economic freedom fighters that we must stop all forms of privatization. All privatization must stop of all companies, whether it's Denel and all of those things. They can play a strategic role if they are given a clear direction and meaning. We still demand for the creation of a state-owned bank, and the nucleus of that state-owned bank must be the African Bank, which already has got the infrastructure to then roll out that particular program. We then call again that the bill which we have introduced as the EFF to discontinue private ownership of the central bank must be passed by this parliament before the end of 2022 so that we can join more than 90% of banks in the world that are owned by central government. We demand that there must be a clear plan in terms of industrial expansion, but also we should explore developmental partnerships, not just burdening the South African fiscus with loans from the callous and rapacious multinational banks and domestic institutions without any meaningful contribution to the South African economy. We reject the bill, the budget with contempt, and we know because it is not going to create anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.